to East Africa. And we begin by looking at something that's happening in Tanzania, with a country which is approaching its general elections on October the 29th, under what Human Rights Watch describes as an increasingly repressive environment in its latest report. Human Rights Watch details a pattern of media crackdowns, forced article removals, arrests of opposition figures, and the silencing of civil society voices, all raising serious doubts about whether the elections will be free, fair, or even credible. Well, to help us unpack these developments, we're now joined by Nomathamsanqa Masiko-Mpaka, who's Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, and good morning to your listeners.
In broad terms, your report doesn't paint a good picture for Tanzania. Take us through the most concerning aspects of the things that you found.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely correct. I mean, I think the picture for Tanzania in the lead up to the elections that are scheduled for October 29th this year, they paint a pretty bleak picture. And I think for us as Human Rights Watch, even, deciding to embark on this research was because we had been observing and also hearing from local NGOs on the ground about, the authorities clamping down on the activities of the media, those who are perceived to be government critics, political opposition, excuse me, and restrictive legislation and policies, the restrictions and blocking of opposition parties, the use of force, the arbitrary arrests, abductions, disappearances, killings, torture, and ill treatment. So really, these were the things that were coming out, on the ground. And I think maybe what also rang the alarms for us was when, local NGOs started documenting also these cases. And when Boniface and Agatha, Kenyan and Ugandan activists were abducted and tortured, we realized that I think there's a lot happening in the domestic front in Tanzania in the lead up to elections, and there was a need for us to conduct a more comprehensive report on the human rights concerns. And from the conversations that we had, sort of the more preliminary conversations we had as we're, trying to get our ducks in a row for the research, we realized that a lot of what happens in Tanzania, not only is it done and said in Kiswahili, but the reporting is also in Kiswahili. So often the English-speaking world would not know what is happening because it's written in Kenya. Some of the, rhetoric is in is in Kiswahili as well. That was kind of the general motivation for us to conduct this research. And really, we spoke to over 20 activists, political actors. We spoke with members of the media, religious leaders as well, who've been vocal about the political climate in the country, the abductions that are happening, the disappearances that are happening, and what they were experiencing as a result of speaking out. And a lot of them are living in a perpetual state of fear, because anybody who speaks out about, against the government is heavily penalized, and their lives are threatened.
What are people telling you on the ground there in terms of, is this an escalation in human rights abuses? It's hard to imagine that this is the Tanzania of Julius Nyerere and maybe even Jakaya Kikwete.
Absolutely. I think, things, I suppose with Magufuli passing away, due to COVID, there was a lot of renewed hope, I think, in the country, with Mama Samia, taking on the presidency. And, she came as well with what appeared to be, commitment to reforms and reconciliation and, all the good things. But that was just, based on the evidence before us, there was nothing of that happened. And it was more of a continuation. And now, as we're leading up to the elections, as they're trying to consolidate power, we're seeing that there is actually an escalation of the violence from the Magufuli era. And I think really what we'd like to see really is for the Electoral Commission to be independent. And I think a lot of the media the media practitioners in the country, people such as yourself, are honestly self-censoring. They stop from doing their work. They're threatened. Just recently, JAMA Forums was taken off. People who are doing work on social media. So it's not just mainstream media, it's social media and all kinds of alternative forms of media that are being restricted. And of course, access to information is then, of course, curtailed, and just general media freedoms being threatened in the country.
The Electoral Commission, what kind of evidence is coming forward that perhaps their independence is not guaranteed?
Well, first of all, despite its name, because it's called the Independent National Electoral Commission, but despite its name, those who are appointed, particularly the president, they're appointed by the president of the country. So you cannot have somebody who's meant to be objective in the management of elections be appointed by the president. And of course, and then the decisions that are made then cannot be challenged within the court. You find, we know, for example, with the Chadema leader as well, who's now been suspended from participating in the elections and is facing the treason trial and the rest of it. But really, these are all issues that the Independent National Electoral Commission should be able to manage in a way that is fair to ensure that the elections are free and fair. So I think we want, for sure, and this is what's coming out as well from the ground, is that for the Independent National Electoral Commission to actually be true to its word, and be independent. Because what we've seen is that there have been some changes which have been cosmetic in terms of the renaming of the commission, but in terms of its substantive, any substantive changes, things remain the same. They basically do the government's bidding.
What are you hearing from ordinary citizens? Are they living in fear? I mean, one can understand journalists being targeted, activists being targeted. Sometimes that's part of the political game. What about citizens? Are they fearful given what they're seeing?
I mean, and this was the question for me as I began this research as well, because I said to myself, well, we see what the political parties are saying, we see what the civil society organizations are saying, but is what they are saying also sort of representative of what the citizens are saying as well? And I think and this was like a sort of recurring question within the research as well. And from what I understood is that there is certainly a restlessness within just general society. There is, a restlessness in terms of people's inability to speak out and just their fundamental civil and political rights being infringed upon. And of course, there's also the socioeconomic and the connections there. But I think for sure, and when Chadema talks about no reforms, no elections, they were telling us as Human Rights Watch that actually that slogan actually came from the ground. It wasn't a top-down slogan. It is a slogan that came from below. So people do want change. They do want sort of more immediate reforms in terms of people being able to participate in the elections free and fairly, but also more longer term constitutional reforms. So for sure, these are not just, sentiments of the elite, of those we're speaking to, but they are also sentiments that come from below.
So some defenders of these measures argue that they're necessary to preserve stability, order and national security. Is there anything that opposition figures, journalists that have written about that could be deemed problematic enough for the country to take such drastic measures?
Absolutely not. It's an unequivocal no. As an organization that focuses on human rights, for us, human rights are, they're so fundamental, and there's absolutely nothing that a human being could say or do that would then, make it okay for them to be arbitrarily arrested, to be abducted, to be disappeared, to be killed, to be tortured. Those freedoms should be protected at all costs. And I think there is a need for the government to engage with its people, and for it to engage with civil society, because at this point it seems to be quite an adversarial sort of relationship. I think, the dialogue is important to happen so that somehow they meet each other in the middle. But ultimately, the human rights need to be protected at all costs. For us, that is a non-negotiable, because people are, incredibly repressed. People are living in fear. In one of the interviews, one of the gentlemen I spoke to talked about how, just like how normal things like being able to approach a woman and ask a woman out. He was like, as an activist, we are so fearful because people are planted, people are there to poison us, people are there to do all kinds of things. So basic things like approaching a woman, a beautiful woman, and say, hey, I like you. Would you like to go out for a coffee? You're in constant fear. He was saying just moving around. He was like, I don't move around alone, for example. I always have to have somebody with me in case I'm abducted, or receive some kind of arrest from the police. So the moment is very tense as we're leading up to the elections. And I think we need to have the government listen to its people ahead of the elections, and certainly even beyond the elections.
Have you engaged the authorities at all at any level with regards what you found, and did they
Mm.
respond?
Yeah, so we did write a letter to the authorities, alerting them of this research and some of our findings. Unfortunately, we've not heard from them. But I mean, this is for us ongoing work. And so even though we may not have heard from them now, because we know that it's a pretty busy time, but I hope that they do eventually respond, and that we can have some kind of engagement with them around, some of our recommendations and just our findings, and to hear their side of the story as well.
How widespread are these issues? Is this right across the country or mainly
Mm.
the bigger cities?
No, it's something that's certainly widespread, but of course, the larger cities would be more affected, where you'd find a lot of the more, political activism. But it's something that's relatively well spread. I think if you speak wherever you're located, if you're speaking out, if you're posting on social media, if you're doing anything that they would disagree with, any kind of dissent, you would be affected. But for sure, the bigger cities would be disproportionately affected.
From what you've seen so far, i- can the elections be credible at all?
If things remain the way they are, it's difficult to say that they would be credible, free, and fair. And it's what, less than a month before elections. So and I think there is that kind of contestation of what is possible in light of the time constraints, and what is desirable as well, coming from civil society. But I'm hoping that with some of the conversations, that if the government does eventually respond, and other actors that are involved, because I understand we're not the only role players that are speaking out against what's happening. There are a lot of conversations that are happening in closed doors. I'm hoping that the government will be able to heed the calls of the people, the ordinary people, the citizen, the civil society, and anybody who's speaking out or about what is just, about what is right, and that maybe there could be some minimal reforms leading up to elections to ensure that they're actually free and credible, and that everybody participates in a free and fair way. Because we've heard incidences, for instance, in Zanzibar, where people are struggling to access ID cards,
Mm.
which they would then need to participate in the elections, as it is in any other country, right? Where you need to have your ID card when you're going out to vote. But now, if you're restricting access for people to get those ID cards, that's a deliberate attempt to ensure that those people's voices are not heard in the elections. And so there's a lot happening in the country beyond just the physical violence that you're seeing, but also just deliberate, attempts to stop certain individuals from actually participating in the elections by preventing them from getting ID cards.
All right, and perhaps finally, what are Human Rights Watch's core recommendations? What must Tanzania's government do, and maybe even regional bodies and partners, even the UN, do in response?
Well, we want the Independent National Electoral Commission to be independent and be true to its word. We need the stop. We need to close the tap on the violence, the arrests, the abductions, the disappearances, the killings, the torture, the ill treatment. That needs to stop. I think that tap needs to close because it's quite intense. But also, we want to ensure that these elections are free and fair, that everybody is able to participate, both the political actors who are part of the election, but also those who are coming in to vote. So that needs to happen. I think there's a role for sure that, the African Commission can play in terms of also speaking out. And we often don't see that happening as often as we'd like. But I think there's a role that the African Commission, the East African Commission, could be playing. And interestingly, some of the conversations that we've had, with some of the interviewees as well, saying that we need people to write. So people like yourselves who are in the media, the SABC and others, to really start spotlighting what is happening. Because
Right.
again, violations are happening in Kiswahili. The mainstream media does not know what's happening. So we need everybody needs to come to the party.
And that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much indeed for highlighting these troubling issues in East Africa, Tanzania in particular. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That's Nomathamsanqa Masiko-Mpaka, who's an Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch, talking to us about the situation in Tanzania, the abuses taking place ahead of elections in the country. It's time now for